Welcome back, Rabbi Dr. Eliezer Brut, fresh off, joining us for a Siyum Zerayim Yerushalmi in Yerushalayim, Ira Kodesh, overlooking our bias. So nice to have you participating, and the people that were there were able to meet you, and thank you for all your tremendous work and efforts. Today, part 2 of Choshen Mishpat throughout the ages, and we thank our sponsor, who's anonymous, but he is dedicating this program, this shir, L'ilui Nishmas, Miriam Bas Menachem Zev, and as a refuah shalema for Rabbi Victor Binyamin Ben Peril from it. So he should have a refuah shalema, and the neshama should also have an aliyah, and we thank them. So Rabbi Brot is going to continue with some of the Rishonim and Achreinim, how they addressed Choshen Mishpat throughout the ages. Looking forward. Rabbi Brot.
Hello, how are you? Okay, so in the first episode, we discussed basically Yosef Cairo, the Ramah, and the Marshal. That these are the three. This is the starting point of the world of when you get down to Halacha, Torah, Shulchan Aruch, where they devoted their works in making codification of mass amounts of information of halacha. Now, we spoke about how all three of them understood already the power of print. Printing had just begun a little earlier, and the Ramah was actually going against his Messiah by transcribing and putting down halacha l'maisa. L'mashal, his Rabbi Reb Shachni, I think I mentioned last time, was anti-writing down halacha. But at the end of the day, all these three Gedolim in their own methods, which we discussed a little bit last time, they put down halacha. Now, and from there on, the impact it's until today. Not necessarily does everyone realize that. Now, today we'll see a little bit what the impact of the Ramah and the Marshal had on the next generation of people after them. Now, what they did was they gathered crazy amounts of information on one hand, but they also reached Piskei Halacha. L'mashal, we mentioned, we stressed again and again, the Beis Yosef, besides for paskening, he collected a crazy amount of information and became sort of the library for the next bunch of generations. The Ramah was concerned about, amongst other things, that there was missing the Poland / Ashkenaz Messiah. Marshal also had issues with that, and that's what they did. But the bottom line is that what I claim and tried to outline a little bit is that not only that their methods, the Mahalach HaLimud of these Gedolim, were used for Dairei Dairis Ad Yameinu in the various works on Shulchan Aruch. And that's what we're going to continue with today. Now, to start out, the first Chibur that basically comes out after the Ramah and Shulchan Aruch, is from the Levush. Ramar Tchiyafi, he's born in 1530, dies in 1612. Now, he was a Talmud of the Marshal and the Ramah, and he mentions this in his Akdama already. His Levush, at least some of it, came out a few times even already in his lifetime. So just like the other Chiburim that we have earlier that I mentioned in the previous episode, the Beis Yosef, the Ramah, and the Marshal, where they have these huge Hagdamas where they outline lots of different information. So the Levush also has a massive introduction, which is very kedai to go through to see his methods and what he's trying to do. But one nekuda that I would like to bring out with the Levush is that in his Kufa, he was considered one of the Gedolei Adar. L'mashal, the Tzemach David, when he talks about him, he says, "Arav Hagadol Hamuflig B'Chachma," and then he says, when he's talking about the Himid Talmidim Harbe, V'Roish Ikar Migdolei Rosh Yeshivas V'Dayanid Shalish Aratzos. You say the head of the Va'ad Arba Aratzos, he was the head. In the episode that we gave last year about the Get Mivina, he was one of the Gedolei Adar, and we saw even with Sof Yom Mamish, but they were sought out his psakim, and we saw the yachas of certain of the Gedolim, how they looked at him as Mamish, one of the Gedolei Adar. Looking into L'mashal the Chidah and Shem HaGedolim, so he deals with mentioning Kedarka B'Kodesh in the different entries that he has on him, mentioning all different pieces of information. And one thing he throws out already is that the Levush on Choshen Mishpat is called Ir Shushan, and the Semah, he says, brings it down often, but he argues on it a lot, which we'll get to shortly. A chibur was written already early on to attempt to answer up some of the sagas of the Semah on the Levush, and there was a lot of other chiburim on the Levush. Now, but the point is that he was a Talmud of the Marshal and a Talmud of the Rama. Now, interestingly enough, some people are under the impression that right away he was dismissed and no one really looked at him, but as I said, already in his lifetime was printed a few times, which is very unique. In one of the introductions that was published in his lifetime, he writes that he heard that in Yerushalayim there was a kvias to learn his sefer after davening. So he got good feedback already in his time. Lamaisa, some people try to claim that there was very shvacha impact afterwards. My investigation has shown that that's not true. For example, the people that we're going to be starting to discuss now, it doesn't make a difference. I'm not trying to say that they agreed with everything he said, but they learned what he said, starting from the Semah, Taz, Shach, and onwards. Magen Avram, Mashal Magen Avram in Orach Chaim quotes him hundreds of times. The Taz in Orach Chaim hundreds of times. Now, it's not to say that he doesn't argue or not. Just to bring this home, the Mishnah Berurah, much later on than the Gedolei Noisei Kelim Shulchan Aruch, writes, one of the things is he sought out all different interesting, important svarim on Shulchan Aruch. One of them, he's proud to say that I got a copy of the Levush, because at a certain point in time, it became very hard to find. Aruch HaShulchan also is very much into the Levush. He copies different styles of Levush. Now, what's the style of Levush? So in the Hakdama, the Levush writes out that he's trying to do something. It seems that he also had the bad luck, which we discussed last time, that at the same time, Rabbi Yosef Karo was working on his work, the Ramah was working on his work, so it seems the Levush was also working on some type of work at this time, and they both beat him out. But after the Ramah and the Beis Yosef came out, what he did say was like this: he saw that there's still a necessity for his work. What am I referring to? The Shulchan Aruch, which now had the psakim, the bottom line, so to speak, of the Beis Yosef's psakim from Beis Yosef in the Shulchan Aruch, and then the Ramah wrote a mappa on that. So the Levush felt that there's still room for him. What was it that he wanted to do? Some type of middle ground, because Ruah Halacha is very hard to learn and remember, and you have to know the Tamim at least bekitzer. With the Beis Yosef, we know is a crazy amount of information, and maybe the Ramah Darkei Moshe is too little information. So he did something in between, and that's what he set out to do. Now, for many people, this was a very important starting point. And out of Yoim, it's sort of becoming a sort of revival. I would say something about 20, 30 years ago. The Levush was reprinted in a very user-friendly edition, and I think that even helped that in the past 20, 30 years, more people use Levush because it's found in all standard shul libraries, yeshiva libraries, and, people learning Mishnah Berurah. The Mishnah Berurah does quote it a lot, and the world of halacha has become more popular, so it sort of became somewhat to look at it again, whereas for a good few hundred years, people did not look at it. The question is, why not? There's no good answers for that. Okay. Now, just to be messiahing this prat with the Levush, which also harps on the conclusion with our story with the Ramah and the Beis Yosef. And that is the Chai Adam, he wrote two Hagdamas to his work. Both of these Hagdamas are very important, where he emphasizes the importance of learning halacha l'maisa. And then he says like this: even though the Mechaber means Rabbi Yosef Karo wrote to Shulchan Aruch, but for him, what was the Iker Chibur for the Beis Yosef? So he says, Iker Chiburei hu Beis Yosef on the Torah. So too the Ramah. What does the Chayam say? What's the Iker Chibur? The Darkei Moshe. Why? Because over there they show where does everything come from. The Shulchan Aruch is just sort of, what is it for? This is a fascinating thing. Others say this also. Shulchan Aruch eine el kesimonim lachzer boy bekitzer la'achar shalom and adin betor bebeis Yosef. And he says that's also how the Gra looked at this work in his Bir Gra. This is a very important sentence. And then he quotes a famous Bach, which says that you can't just paskin a halacha from an open Shulchan Aruch. You have to know the tamim. The Bach says you have to know shayrish, the shayrish tamim. You have to know the shayrish of the story, and that's what says continues the Chai Adam Lamashal the Elya Rabbah. When he wrote his chibur on the Levush, which proves my point that the Levush, there still was many people using the Levush. Why? Because lima the Levush is mevar tam shall kol din v'din. So and what happens is also then the Chayim continues that the Hazim Magen Avraham, that's what they did in Shulchan Aruch. They opened up the Shulchan Aruch that it's not just raw psak halacha. You can't just paskin from raw psak halacha. You have to know somewhat the reasons. So this is a very important nakuda. We're not going to go into all the different aspects of it. Where that's not the point of this whole thing. But this plays out in the work of the Shulchan Aruch and the Ramah and everything. But this is how the Chayei looks at it, and many others. Okay. So Ad Kan, this is the story of the Levush, and now we go to the Noise Kalim, so to speak, what became known as today, and the question when that happened is beyond what we'll be talking about, is the first of the Noise Kalim on Shulchan Aruch Choshen Mishpat, which is the Semah. So again, we have a very important person, which for some, again, he had the bad luck, which we're going to get to, the famous Shach. So since he was going up, so to speak, against the Shach, he doesn't have that same fame, so to speak, I would say, today. But Bizmanoi, we're going to see he was considered unbelievable. Who is he? So he's Rabbi Shua Valakatz, Falk, however you want to say his name, and in translating it. And he's famous for, number one, writing this work called the Semah on Choshen Mishpat, which is published the first time in 1614. And then but what's less known, people don't realize, is he has another work, which is known as the Prisha/Dresha, which is found on the Torah. Now, who is he? So, the important point, which is following in the first episode, is that he's a Talmud of both the Ramah and of the Marshal. And he's very proud that he learned by these two Gedolei Olam. And my claim is that he takes what he learned from these Gedolei Olam and he moves on from that. And that so what I'm trying to claim is we see a direct influence of the great Marshal and the Ramah and the first of the Noise Kalim and Shulchan Aruch. He's mamish a Talmud of both of these people. Now, it's not just that he's a Talmud, and it's not just that he quotes material from the Marshal and that he's writing a Pirush on the Ramah, his Rebbe. It's that he's going with their Mahalchim throughout his Chibur. And just to point one knetch in this Nakuda is that one of the points that I mentioned, which the Marshal is very, very important when you talk about the Marshal, is he held that you have to go back to the Makairis. You have to go back, look inside, learn the Sugyas inside, make sure not to rely on any secondary sources or even worse. This was a very fundamental Nakuda in the Mahalach HaLimud of the Marshal, especially going back to the Gemara and learning the Rishonim properly. So now here I could say that if you, once again, the Dresha/Semah has a massive Hagdama where he outlines his Mahalach HaLimud, his interesting points about his life, and his methods of learning and what he was trying to do. And once again, it's incredible to read. So what the bottom line so far is that everyone, so far all the people we discussed, you don't have to rely on academics necessarily or Gedolim that learned their Hagdamas. You could read their Hagdamas and you hear their own words, mamish pages devoted to outlining how they looked at their Rabbeim, their methods, and why they wrote their Perusha. So here he talks about, he stresses with the Ramah. It seems the Darkei Moshe wasn't out at that time. We know this from other places. Fine. Then he says, not only was he Zaycha to learn by the Ramah, he's proud of, as I said, learning by the Marshal. So now, at a certain point in time, he becomes basically a major Rosh Hashiva. Now, how was he able to be a Rosh Hashiva? He married a very wealthy person. And he describes at length his Shver. His Shver basically supported him, built him a massive shul, a klois, where him and his Talmidim were able to sit without any tirdus, learn Yoimam V'Layla. So basically here we have a person, he was learning the Sugyas, and he outlines it, he mamish started from scratch, he learned whatever there was out there, mamish a Talmud of the Marshal. It was 3 floors, a beautiful building he describes, and he's learned this in Lemberg, a proper city. He has a big yeshiva. Now, interestingly enough, is he says they learned 14 Masechtas. We don't, the standard Yeshivish Masechtas are not 14, so he learned more than the standard Yeshivish Masechtas. What they were, he doesn't say. Kitzer, he also writes down by Rikhos how he wrote a lot of the stuff down, what they learned in the yeshiva, his shiurim and everything, and then tragically there was a fire and destroyed everything. So the Kitzer, obviously this gave him motive to get moving, and the next time around he was careful to publish it. Now he outlines what it is that he wants to do and how he's mityaches to the Beis Yosef and the Ramah and the Marshal and everyone, but at the point is that he says it b'kavod, he looks at their stuff, he's reading their stuff, he's learning their stuff, but he's putting it through intense analyzing it with Talmidim, with Pilpul Chaverim, giving these massive shiurim, and basically he didn't have any terdus. You could see from the description over here, he was able to sit and learn. At a later point in this Hagdama, he describes mamish how wealthy the Shver was. The Shver was supporting tons of different things, but the point was he was zeicha with as opposed to many of the other that we're going to read about. They didn't have this maila of being able to have this crazy yeshiva das to just sit and learn in a shul, in a yeshiva building without having to worry about anything. He didn't have to go fundraise, nothing. And he puts out this work on Shulchan Aruch, which is the Semah, which is a very, very fundamental work. Here in the Hagdama, he talks about the Levush, why he doesn't like the Levush. He describes a conversation he had with the Levush about the Levush's work. And as I said, you can learn many, many things from this Hagdama of his. But the point that I'm making is we see, again, the flow of someone taking information, looking up the Makairis of the Beis Yosef, going up either Mahalach of the Marshal, going up either Mahalach of the Ramah, reaching Psak Halacha. At times he argues, but he does say, if you make a mistake, Adarabba, you don't have to go according to me. I'm not the Seifa Sipur, so to speak. Okay. And every time I read this Hagdama, it's fascinating. It's mamish fascinating because you're mamish seeing him right firsthand what was going on in his kufa and his talmidim and everything. Okay, so and Lamaisi publishes his work, and now we don't have a massive chibur of his on Shulchan Aruch, other than the chibur of Choshen Mishpat, but we have Drisha Prisha. Interestingly enough, a few years ago they found the Semah of his on Yeridei 40 Samanim. I think there was some other discoveries of some material of his. Okay, but I found the story of the Semah. But the point also is he's the first, when you open up your standard Shulchan Aruch, even today, the starting conversation in Shulchan Aruch usually will begin with a Semah. Okay, now we move on. We go back to the Tur. In a standard tour, everyone knows you have the Beis Yosef on one side, and you have the Bach on the other side. So the Bach, he's the next person in our story, and he's also a very important person in the story. Now, he takes issue with certain things. He takes issue with certain things of the Semah. He felt, Lamashal, the Semah in his Hagdama writes that one of the things is that he goes al pi what's called pilpul, which I already say this many times in different shiurim. We did not ever explain properly what that means, but he feels the Bach does not like that. He feels that halacha l'maisa, you're not supposed to use pilpul methods, whatever those words mean. And he's upset about the Semah, particularly with this, and he argues with him many times. Anyway, so he writes this massive work, but the Bach, the difference between the Bach and the Semah is that we have Bach on Daled Chelkei Shulchan Aruch. The Bach, his story, so now he's already breaking from what we, up to now, the Levush and the Semah, the Talmidim of both the Marshal and of the Ramah. So the Bach is not. He's a Talmud of Talmidim of both. You say the Bach has Rabbeim that learned by Marshal, and he has Talmidim that he's also Talmud of people that learned by the Ramah. So again, this Messiah that I'm building up, which is to show that there's a direct chain, the Ramah and the Marshal. It's not just that they wrote these important works, but their Torah Shabbal Peh was given over to the next generations. This is a key fundamental nekuda that I like to bring in. Okay, so the Bach, we can be married on him in Lever Saif, but bottom line is he's born in somewhere between 1560 and 1564, and he dies in 1640, a little before Tachzatat. He's one of the Gedolei Adar, and again, he's on the Vadar Baratza. He sees a big name. He's a Rav in a bunch of Kehillos. Why he was a Rav in a bunch of Kehillos is beyond the scope, but it seems that he might have been a Rav in like 8 different places. And he's a tremendous Rosh Hashiva and has numerous Talmidim. But as I said, what's also significant for us is we have the Torah. He wrote down all this information not necessarily all, but a crazy amount of information is recorded by him and published mostly by him, the Bach on tour, on Daled Chelkei Shulchan Aruch. Aruch Chaim comes out a little bit after he dies, and Lamaisa, the Bach is also an incredible work. We also have numerous tshuvas of his that were published over the years, which are very important in the world of halacha. Some of them are very lengthy, and you're able to get incredible insight into his Malach HaLimud. And here too, again, just to mention very bekitzer, we see a tremendous influence of the Marshal on the Bach, the same type of mahalach of what different things we find with the Bach, which we outlined a little bit in the previous episode of the Marshal, can be found with the Bach. Not only that, he brings the Marshal numerous psakim from the Marshal, which is also a similar type of thing. So there's the Torah Shebal Peh and the Torah Shebiksav. The Torah Shebiksav is the psakim from the Marshal, and the Torah Shebal Peh is the Mahalach HaLimud of the Marshal. So this takes us to the Bach. Now, why the Bach wrote on the tour is beyond the scope of what we're trying to discuss now. But one nakuda just to throw out there is it's famous, the Bach. One of the things with the Bach is, there's a Hagayis HaBach on the side of the Gemara. So he was also very concerned with the text of the Gemara. This also is something which we know the Marshal was Isaac, because everyone knows when you learn Marshal many times, he also deals with the text of the Gemara. So this is something else that there was some type of influence possibly on him. A few years ago, we was there was a major discovery, which was they found Chedushim of the Bach. There's a whole discussion about it, but it's pretty much verified. So not only do we have the Bach on Daled Chelkei Shulchan Aruch and numerous tshuvas and some other svarim of his on Kabbalah and on Megillas Rus, but we have on certain Masechtas they found his chibur Lamashal Masechtas Shabbos and other Masechtas, and from there also it gives us a glimpse into this great guy. Okay, and what I was able to see when you learn through it is this tremendous impact of, again, the Marshal and Ramah on him. Fine. Now we move on. We move on to the next person in our story, and that is the Taz. So the Taz is the only person that we have that the Taz wrote on Daled Chelkei Shulchan Aruch that we have. However, the story of the Taz and Daled Chelkei Shulchan Aruch is different. I mean, say, when was each one printed? It was at a different period of time. Some were in his lifetime and some much later, as we'll see. We're not going to go outline everything about the Taz. There's a lot to say about the Taz, but just to say very briefly, he's born in 1586. He dies in 1667. Now, he learns he had a brother, he quotes material from his brother, and then eventually he marries the daughter of the Bach, and he comes to learn his yeshiva, and it seems he lived in Krakow, and he learned by him, he lived by him, there's all types of stories. We also have a chibur of his on Rashi, a famous chibur in more recent years also, Divrei David. And Lamaisa, it's also legendary at the end about what Shapsei Tzvi, he sent his kids to speak to him, etc. Okay, he dies at a Zaken, 1667. Now, he's a Rav. He's, again, the head of the Vad Arba Ratzos. So we're talking about a person who's one of the Gedolei Hadar, but he's also the Rosh Hashiva Hadar. He has hundreds of Talmidim, it seems, in all the different places where he was. He has many different Talmidim. And also very important is that he writes on everything. He writes on Daled Chelkei Shulchan Aruch. Okay. I'm just going to say very few yedias relating to him, and that is as follows. Number one, if you look at in Lamashal, the chibur of his on Aruch Chaim, so you'll see the askamas that he got. So first of all, the key point is he was considered the Gadol Hadar in his time. He's, as I said, he's the head of the Vad Arba Ratzos, so the Chuvas, the Halacha Shailas were going to him, and he's giving the Shiurim. And he had a big yeshiva, and he's a Rav in prominent cities. And he's also a son-in-law of the Gadol Hadar of the previous generation. So these are key factors when you're thinking about the Taz in general. Zaken and Moirei Hara and the Rosh Hashiva Hadar, and he has the Yichus, and you say he married the right family. Okay, now, if you look at the chashivas that they write about him, in the askamas that he got on the Chibur Aruch Chaim, it says like this: Sifrei Turizav, Ini tzarech haskama mishum ada ba'olam, ki rabban shel b'nei hagayla, Ukvar Nisparsim Svar B'Chibur B'Chol Yisrael, because Or Chaim was published after he dies in 1692, which is why he dies in 1667. Another person writes, Another person writes, "Halacha kamaisai be Yisrael." So you see that there was tremendous chashivas for the Taz, and yet when people learn when people learn Lamashal Arachaim, the Taz is an extremely important player in halacha of learning Arachaim. And Yardeya, Pashat, everyone knows. You learn Yardeya. Aleph Beis is the Taz and the Shach. It's not only that it's on the side of the page. It's very, very important. Now, again, what do we know about him? What's his Mahalach Halimud? So again, once I already said the Bach is coming from the Marshal, Talmidim the Marshal, and Talmidim of the Marsha, of the Ramah. So it's Pashat. But we see the Taz, he's very not into quoting so many Achronim. One of the only Achronim he quotes is the Marshal with unbelievable kavod. So you see again this Marshal, this claim that I'm claiming through, which is that the Tyrish Baal Peh of the Marshal, his Mahalach Halimud, went now down 2 generations. This is the Bach, is the 2nd generation, the Bach B'nai Dairoi, and now to the Taz, who's the 3rd generation of Psak Halacha. So you see there's a tremendous impact on the Marshal, which I already said last time. Some people say, oh, the Amshel Shloimo, here you see from the amount of times alone, because now, of course, the Taz was a very, as I said, he's a Gadol Adar, he's a very confident Paisik. He argues on the Marshal plenty of times, but he has a murder Chashivas fit. He's also very much into the Bach. Okay, fine. He also has his Adama, which he writes on Yeridea, which was published in his lifetime. Again, we see that he learned this with Talmidim, and his Talmidim asked him to publish it. So you see, again, not only is it the Rosh Hashiva, but they learned Halacha L'maisa was a very big concern, and they learned all of Yeridea. And at the end of the Adama, he talks about how he hopes that his Chibur on Choshen Mishpat, sounds like it was ready, is also going to get published. Now, the problem is that the Chibur on Choshen Mishpat gets published very late in the game. Now, why that is, there's no way to know, but the facts are that it gets published late in the game. One of the key svarim, when one wants to learn about the history of this time, is a Chashiv Chibur from a tremendous Talmud Chacham, who was Chashiv Yid and a Rav in Krakow, which we discussed actually in the first episode that I gave on All Daf, which was about the machine matzah controversy. I spoke all about this Yid. His name was Reb Chaim Nosson Dembitzer. He was one of the people in the famous controversy, led the controversy against, he held that machine matzah is a problem, and he was very close with the Rosh Kluger. They led the battle, Kilu to Aser machine matzah. So what's less known is that he was also a Murdik expert in history. And he wrote a massive work, which Ada Yoim is considered Kodesh Kodashim, with tremendous kavod of the Gedolim that he's writing about, with tremendous yeda, not only of history, but you could tell what makes him unique is that he knows the inside of the Svarim too, which is very important a lot of times. And it's called Klilas Yoifi. So Klilas Yoifi has Arichos Nifla, because where's the Taza Rav in Lemberg, which he wrote a book all about the Rabbanim of Lemberg. And he deals with the Taz Barichos, all the different chiburim of his. And he says, Choshen Mishpat, sadly, when does it come to print? In 1690s. And not only that, when it comes to be published, if you could look, the Taz on Choshen Mishpat is not the same. Today, understand the Shulchan Aruch, it's on the bottom. You have to look for it even. So it's because it's published in 1692. Less known, and this Reb Dembitzer writes out Barichos about it, who was the person who publishes it? The Chacham Tzvi. It seems the Chacham Tzvi even hid that he was the person who did it. Why he did that, I don't know, but outside Novel he did it, and there's many ha'aris of some other gedolim sprinkled throughout, but it's only till Simon Reish Mem Zayin. When does the rest of the Taz get published? In 1741. So it's fascinating, is for whatever reason, and there's stories that are sad, and we're not going to go into it, but there's claims why the Taz wasn't Zaycha, that his Chibur on Choshen Mishpat wasn't published until late, etc., etc. But what's Nagel in Yonenu is the Taz, one of the Gedolei HaPaiskim throughout the generations, and Bizmano, one of the Gadol Adar, wrote on Daled Chelkei Shulchan Aruch, and Pashut on Choshen Mishpat. His work is also important. And again, he's also preserving this Mahalach, which he's getting from, let's say, the Bach and the Marshal. He's very into. And he writes this out clearly even in his Agdama. When he's talking about it, and he also has Agdama, not as long as the people that we mentioned before, but he also has an important Hagdama in Yerideh. Now, one tiny idea to theory, aura of mine, which I do not know if it's true, but so far, checking into it, I think it is true, is that he really would have written a work, at least in Archaim and maybe even in Choshen Mishpat, more on the Torah, similar to the Bach. But once the Bach wrote on the Torah, so he didn't feel like it's probably proper to write in the Torah. What I mean to say is, when you look at the Taz, he doesn't make it his business to. I'm now talking more in Choshen Mishpat and especially in Archaim, to talk about every single thing. He has a bunch of topics that he feels are important in each simon, and he goes through it. And sometimes you'll see that it mamish glares at you that he's mamish like a Rosh Hashiva giving shir klali. You'll see a long shtickle, and he sets it up with the Gemara, and the Beis Yosef and certain Rishonim, and you could see it's like 2 pages, sometimes huge text, and it's mamish like, if you look at it very carefully, this was the shir. And as I said, he writes in Agdama, this is my shiurim and everything. So basically is that he didn't put it on the Torah, but he's attaching it to the Mechaber and the Beis Yosef and the Ramah. But he's not. It's not so much a chibur to be, let's say, the Semah, who's actually a Talmud of the Ramah, and he writes in Zagam, he's coming to him and mefarish them also part of the story. Okay, I'm saying that. But anyway, it's not a. This is just a theory, and we can move on. Okay, now the last person that we will discuss today is the Shach. The Shach is a story that would technically need hours on hours to discuss him, and we would never even get to even scratching the surface about the greatness of this person. Bottom line is like this: he's born 1621, and he dies at the age of 41 in 1662. That means he's 41 years old, and he puts out a mind-boggling work on Yerideh and on Choshen Mishpat. Now, don't worry. You think that he only wrote that. We have other stuff from him. We're not going to go through all the different pitchafkas and different things about him. But for many years, the matzav, what's called the literature about him, was very, very shvach. There was in this Klilis Yaifi that I just mentioned from Dembitzer, there was, but otherwise it was very little. Somewhere around 20-something years ago, I got a paper from Rav Ezer Schwartz from YU that he wrote about the Shach, a very nice paper, 20-something pages. And it was very useful. I read it many different times. A few years ago, a fellow, Cheskel Feiglin, wrote a master's about the Shach, where he organizes some of the issues with the Shach. And then, very recently, an older Yid, spent many years working on the Shach, Farftig, he wrote this doctorate in Bar Ilan University in the Talmud department, and he also wrote about the Shach, a massive few hundred pages. And even with all this, there's still so much more to say and look and analyze about the Shach. So obviously we have a few minutes. We're not going to really try to discuss all that much about the Shach, just some brief points. One other person that I will mention at the outset is a Yid, Yeshua Imbal. He's a prolific writer, a Haredi writer. So he wrote articles in Yeshurun where he deals with the yafas between the Shach and Taz, which is a famous thing that everyone always talks about. Did they get along? Didn't they get along? Did they like each other? Didn't they like each other? They met. They didn't meet. What they thought about each other. All these different things, which is not so relevant for us because we're talking more on Choshen Mishpat. Yerideh is its own story with the Shach and the Taz and the Yafas, so it's beyond the scope. But anyway, Rabbi Imbal has a whole massive arichos about to fine-tune and figure out what's going on between these two Paiskim, the Mahalchei Alimud, and he's a very fine Talmud Chacham, so he has he's able to talk about it very well. He wrote a massive work around Choshen Mishpat, but also, okay, and he also wrote about the Rebbe Heschel, which we'll see in a moment what's the significance of that. Now, so this Imbal, his material was published originally in Yeshurun and various volumes of the Yeshurun, and then eventually this year it came out in a 3-volume set of it called Bavos Einai from Meiser of Cook, where there's a ton of information which he updates. The Kitzer, these are all the places one could read all about the Shach and again about the Tas. Now, so what would I like to just say in these very brief minutes is, who does he learn by? It seems possibly his father's his Rebbe. Another Rebbe is known as the first Pnei Yeshua. Who's the first Pnei Yeshua? Is the Magine Shloim. The Zayda from the Pnei Yeshua, which he was also one of the Gedolei, Rabbi Yeshua Av Bezin of Krakow, one of the Gedolei Adar of his time, is one of his Rebbeim. And the second Rebbe of his is the Rebbe of Heschel. Now, So we have to understand is the Shach comes along, a 25-year-old guy, and he publishes a work on Yeridea. Now, Ad Hayoim, no one is able to explain how did someone do such a thing. But not only does he do, so let's say a guy comes with this work, the Yeridea, the work on Yeridea, and he's 60 years old, and he writes this unbelievable work, which we're just going to broad strokes in a minute. You say that he does the exact same thing for Choshen Mishpat, and mind-boggling. How does someone do this? And he dies at 41. Now you have to understand, in those days, what was going on? He's living in the times of Tach V'Tat. The other Xeris are going on. He was affected by Tach V'Tat. He so much so he even wrote a Chibur, very not so well known until recent years. It was republished, but Megillas Eifa, where he talks about what went on during Tach V'Tat. He wrote a short book, and then he says he and his family were night to be Tzaim and Tainus when on the Yom Chaf Chodesh Sivan, Chaf Sivan, what we know about. He wrote Slichas. He talks about his Rebbe that we just mentioned, Rebbe Shua. Av Bezin the Krakow dies in this period of time. The Baal Magin Shloima. But Kitzer, so we're talking about a person that he's living in a very, very terrible time for Klal Yisrael. There's no Yishuv Adas. He's not talking like the Semah that's sitting in the shul, doesn't have to worry about money, his shver paid for everything. He's running. Now, happens to be already in his 20s. He's on the Bezdin of the three people, the three Dayanim of the Bezdin of Vilna. No small feat. In the 20s to be the Bezdin. Who's on the Av Bezdin of this is the Chelkas Mechaikak, who we met in the story of the Sparam on Even Ezer. Now, so he's a Dayan, and he puts out these two works, Yeridea and Choshen Mishpat. It's Mashundak, so much so that you could see that no one, they just couldn't get over how could one human being publish such a thing. That in this Travels of the Chidah, which I'm fond of quoting always, he brings down a Messiah that someone said that two things. One is that the Shach knew Shem HaKosev, which is that he was able to have, how can you write so much information on Yeridea and Choshen Mishpat? Look at the Shach and Taz. Today with computers, you couldn't do this. So he says he knew how to do, it's called automatic writing. Shem HaKolmus, Hashbolas HaKolmus, which is that Alpi Kabbalah, he knew a special way to have that it was writing for him. Like what if someone came back from 200 years ago and see what computers are, he would think that's also Shem HaKosev. So the Magal Taib, the Chidah brings down as Amasayra when he's talking about the Shach. Nochazach is, how did he have this crazy Bakiyas? Again, he knew how to use Shemos. Means say they couldn't wrap their brains that Alpi laws of Teva, a Yid could write this work. So they said they had these messiahs. Now, maybe it's true with Feisnish. I wasn't there. What we do know is that even though he was affiliated with Rabbeim and people that were experts in Kabbalah, he never talks about Kabbalah, Kemat, anywhere in his works. Now, it's not a big deal because there's not so much Kabbalah that's going to play out in Yeridea and in Choshen Mishpat especially. But fine. Okay, so this is the story of him. This is prat number one, that he basically is, it's not comprehensible to understand what it is that he does. How could a young man do this? And now, more than that, he goes ahead and he puts out the work on Yeridea. Now you have to remember, we just brought up the whole thing. Who's he going? Who else wrote on Yeridea? The Gadol Hadar, the Taz. All of a sudden, a 25-year-old, imagine today, the Gadol Hadar writes a chibur. Everyone's using it. Everyone's looking at it. And then all of a sudden, or knows his psakim, and then he publishes his work. And then right then, in walks in some 25-year-old guy. They throw him out on his head. They put him on chayrim. Who knows what they would do. He walks in those days, how do you get askama? One of the ways was you at the Yerid. I think I spoke a little bit about it at one point briefly in one of the episodes. In the episode of the Get of Vienna. The story, a lot of these things would take place at the Yerid. So Bekitzer, he brought his work there, and he gets something like 20-something haskamas from all the Gedolei Yodim at the time. And they see the work, and they're blown away. That significantly is that he's a Talmud of two of the Gedolei Adar, besides the Taz. Who is that? The Rebbe of Heschel, who was not known as the Rebbe of Heschel in those days. And as I said, this Rabbi Shua Av Bezner Krakow. Both of them write Gevaldik haskamas in the Chibur on Yeridea. And Lamashal, but he also gets who was the Gadol Hadar at that time? The Taisus Yantif. Taisus Yantif gives him a Gevaldik Haskama also. And it's fascinating is that the Shach, he argues plenty on the Taisus Yantif. So means say but still the Beis Yosef held the Taisus Yantif held. There's Mashu, there's Chashuv, this young fellow, 25-year-old guy. It's right to publish his work, etc., etc. And he gives him this beautiful askama. And just to read two lines from these askamas that we have in the standard editions of the Shulchan Aruch, you won't find it. But if you have the Shulchan Aruch that's now called Mechon Yerushalayim, Reish Manchil, etc., they went ahead and they tracked down from the first edition all the askamas. Okay, state there that he learned by me. He doesn't say he learned by me. The Rabbi Shua writes, "Hayiti imi b'mechitzasi, v'lama b'yeshivasi." Learned by yeshiva. Atazachisi ashabeni reisi. The Kitzer, what he does, and he writes his Mardir Chibur. Now, the Rebbe of Heschel, when he writes about him, that he didn't waste any time. He didn't sleep. Nothing. The Kitzer, he sits and learns. He writes. It's unbelievable. Charifos, Bekiyas, B'Yamab Talmud, and the Paiskim. He's medactic in every single thing. It's unbelievable work. Now, there, he's not even saying that he's his Talmud, but he says you should be zeicha to publish more works. As his farm harm kavaisa yarba Yisrael fine at Yavin Lutzim Goy. The Kitzer, as we have from the Gedolei Olam, they're all blown away by his work that he puts out at the time. Okay, now, right, what I think we'll do is like this. We'll finish up next time a few more pratim with the Shach, and then we'll finish up in the story of the other Paiskim on Choshen Mishpat in the last episode on this farm on Choshen Mishpat. And Mitzvah Hashem next time.
Thank you very much for part 2 on Choshen Mishpat throughout the generations. I like to mention, people like to talk about, who they're Einiklach of. So, Pnei Yeshua is someone I know that I descend from. So I'm here to hear you talking about Pnei Yeshua and his grandfather, the original Pnei Yeshua. And it should be all a schus for us and Klal Yisrael. Okay, have a wonderful day.